few people still filtering in, but we got most people here. We have light. So welcome everyone to the 2020 Sustained Homeostatic Imbalance Due to Environmental Exposure Linked to Deployment Conference, or SHIELD. So thank you again so much for coming. My name is Zena Kirby, and I am the program manager with the Gulf War Illness Clinical Trials and Treatments Center, and so led by Dr. Nancy Klimas here at the Institute of Neuro-Immune Medicine. So we scheduled this event to coincide with the 29th anniversary to the end of Desert Storm in 1991. In this event, we hope to spread awareness of Gulf War illness and the research we're doing. So with that, first off, we'd just like to recognize Mr. Pounds here. He's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing for veterans here at NOVA.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Klimas, for this brief introduction, and thank her team for all the wonderful work she does for you guys. I'm a combat veteran as well, so I know all well the struggles that some of you go through. I did a tour in Iraq and a tour in Afghanistan right after 9/11. So one thing we do here, and as she introduced, my name is Leonard Pounds, the Vice President for Clinical Operations here at NSU. On top of what Nancy's doing in all of the Gulf War illness work, we also started this year in January a Veterans Access Clinic. And what this clinic does, it's funded by the state, thanks to Governor DeSantis and the legislators. They gave us some funding to start a clinic that will not only see the veterans, but also their dependents and their spouses. And what's unique about this is if you come and you don't have insurance, so you don't have dental insurance, you don't have vision insurance, you don't have medical insurance, we're going to be able to see you 100% free most times. We've also set money aside for things like hearing aids, glasses, stuff like that if you need those as well. So my team is here. We're across in DeSantis. I've got Tanisha and her team right here in the front. She's the program manager for that project. If you have any questions about that, we'll be more than willing to answer them. We're here to serve you. And as I've been saying time and time again, we're trying to repay a debt that we can never repay. So any little thing we can do for each one of you and your families is the most important thing that we can do. So I thank you. I have to run. I have prior engagements that I have to take care of. But like I said, my team will be here. They'll answer any questions you may have after the event. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Pounds, for that. Additionally, I'd like to thank our research team as well as the other research teams we have here doing research on Gulf War illness. So if everyone who meets that category would go ahead and stand up, we'd just like to take a minute to thank you as well. So yes, if you work on our team or if you do Gulf War, thank you. And also, of course, we'd like to thank our veteran advocates who were kind enough to be here today, as well as for all the work they do propelling our research forward and bettering healthcare for our Gulf War veterans. So if you are one of our veteran advocates, if you would please stand up as well.
You're an advocate, stand on
They're
up.
all a little crowded over here.
Category is brown.
Without you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, lastly, all the veterans who are here today and on the webcast, I'd just like to thank you for your service. You really made the ultimate sacrifice for our country, so we really appreciate that, and we hope that what we're doing today can improve your lives long-term and the lives of future service members. So thank you. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to bring up our two experts on Gulf War illness. This is Dr. Nancy Klimas and Dr. Kim Sullivan. They'll be doing a presentation on the state of Gulf War illness research today. I'll be pulling up their slides here for them, so no worries about that. And I have a clicker for you as well, so if you'd like to sit or stand, that's up to you. Oh, yeah. Can we move the... You don't have any sound, so we should be able to just move it over.
I don't think you have the width because of the
Okay.
plugs. Let's
I
just stay here.
apologize.
That's cool.
Okay, well, thanks. If you need me to like do advanced slides or anything.
Come on up here.
Hey, everybody.
So we have done this before, the Kim and Nancy show. And it's because we have this amazing friendship that came from our work in this Gulf War illness field. And it was 5-6 years ago that we both, our group here under Mariana Morris and co-PI'd with a number of people, Dr. Fletcher in the back and others, were awarded something called the Gulf War Illness Consortia to bring together a group of researchers to try to get at what the cause of Gulf War illness actually is. And at the same time, Kim was awarded a Gulf War Illness Consortia grant in Boston, where she also brought together nationally a large and amazing group of scientists. And if you can imagine how time passes, we had this 4-year window to get a handle on what is Gulf War illness and then try to move it to clinical trials. So we were just awarded 2 great big grants in the past year to develop the Gulf War Illness Clinical Trials Consortia to move that knowledge forward. And B-Brain, which is this amazing resource for scientists to be able to access the blood samples that you so kindly give us and other samples like that, so that you don't have to actually know how to find veterans to be able to do the science. So it allowed us to bring a lot of new people to the field and tremendous science because of the willingness of veterans to participate in the research that lets us create this biorepository that we can share with other investigators. So you see us together a lot because we work really, really well together. We've been doing amazing science for a long time. So I'm going to let you start the show,
Okay.
and then we'll go.
So as Dr. Klimas said, we've been working together for many years, and we heard from our veterans very early on when we were doing this, and I've been doing this research for 20 plus years with all of you, that you should be working together. You should be building on your strengths and bringing teams of people who have different expertise together for this difficult disorder. And we've done that. So that's what we've been doing and in our consortia that we both had. And it's really worked out. And it's really propelled us into the area where we can understand what we think is at the root of the illness and also how do we develop treatments for it. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the state of the science and how do we move that knowledge forward. And I think you just got a welcome from the Neuro-Immune team here,
Yay,
who's
Star
done
team.
incredible work and has this incredible facility to be able to do this live streaming too, which is amazing.
And actually,
Say
the
something about
point
your
of
team.
this side, this is this huge team that you just saw some of. We have 62 people. The main thing we do is try to advance the knowledge on this illness. That's this illness and chronic fatigue syndrome are our 2 big focus areas. So we absolutely are the largest dedicated group of people in the country trying to solve this problem. It's exciting, and they're just amazing people. I can't go through the list because there goes the day.
And as we said, you've got the NOVA team here. We've also got the Boston Gulf War Illness Consortium group, which also then was turned into the Boston Biorepository and Integrative Network for Gulf War Illness, or B-Brain. And it says Boston, but it's across the country. So we have 20 investigators from all across the country, including our NOVA team, which has been really integral, working with us for all of the studies that we've been doing for biomarkers and treatment development. And so in this session, we're going to talk about what is Gulf War illness, what do we know about the cause, what research is going on with our group at the Institute for Neuro-Immune Medicine and with the GWIC and B-Brain groups at Boston University and nationally, as I mentioned, and how do we move faster, learn more, and move it on to clinical trials and accessible treatment as quickly as we can. And so just to give you an overview, Gulf War illness is a chronic multi-symptom disorder that affects about 1/3 of all Gulf War veterans, and that's about 250,000 sick veterans. And I think people don't understand the numbers are really quite staggering of how many of our veterans have this disorder. And so we like to remind folks about that. The causes, we believe it's related to toxicant exposures during the war from a similar class of chemicals called acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. And this included things like pesticides that we used widely during this deployment to protect from insect-borne illnesses, but we didn't know at the time, almost 30 years ago, was that when you combine all of those pesticides, it can cause chronic health effects in people too when you're exposed to them. Our veterans also took anti-nerve gas pills that are in the same class of chemicals, those pyridostigmine bromide or PB pills. They were exposed to low levels of sarin and cyclosarin, at least during one time at the Camisea detonations that we know of, but probably during other times as well. And there were other exposures, things like oil well fires that were lit. 600 oil wells were lit on fire during this deployment, and there was exposure to things like depleted uranium. So quite a lot of unique exposures during this particular deployment that we think are related to the chronic health outcomes that our veterans have been dealing with. We know that our veterans deployed to the Gulf War from August of 90 to July of 91 and times in between, depending on where you were. And the most commonly diagnosed symptom presentation, our veterans have cognitive problems, fatigue, chronic pain, but also respiratory problems, gastrointestinal problems, other issues that they've been dealing with for many years. So it's truly a multi-system disorder that takes a team of different experts working on it together to try and solve. So what do we know about the cause of the disorder? I think I just mentioned a little bit about that. Retrospective studies and some of the animal studies with some of the preclinical researchers we've been working with have done a lot of work around this, and we believe it's related to neurotoxicants that our veterans were exposed to. As I mentioned, these pesticides and organophosphate sarin and cyclosarin nerve gas agents we believe are, at least in our animal models, related to the chronic inflammation we see in our veterans. And the risk and vulnerability are also explored with studies like genetic predispositions to the disorder, detoxification pathways, and immune function. And the illness persistence is the main focus of the research. This is a chronic disorder. Our veterans have had it for 30 years, so we want to know what causes this chronic disorder. And so we've been working very hard to try and figure that out in all of our research teams. And then how do we set up treatments to stop this chronic disorder? And most of the VA and CDMRP research portfolios have been focusing on this goal to get discoverable targeted areas for treatment. And right now there are about 37 treatment trials listed on clinicaltrials.gov. And I used to be the Associate Scientific Director for the RAC Committee many years ago, and at that time we had about 2 clinical treatment trials, not that long ago, about 10 years ago. So the fact that we have 37 now is truly a testament to the researchers working together in this field to really try to develop treatment as fast as we can.
And the advocates finding the money.
Absolutely, and the advocates finding the funds and keeping pushing for the treatment development. So that's actually absolutely key. So what do we know so far about causes of the disorder? We certainly know inflammation seems to be at the root of Gulf War illness, at least one of the areas. Yes, and this is actually a paper that we just published with our group from Mass General Hospital and Harvard University, and we were able to do this advanced PET imaging study with, I think, some of the advocates here who were kind enough to participate in this. And what we saw for the very first time was widespread inflammation in the brains of our Gulf War veterans who have Gulf War illness. So this is something we've had been thinking could be at the root of the disorder for some time, but now we've actually just shown this in a publication that's freely available on our websites that you can share with your care providers and that you can have for yourselves. But this gives us a real area to now target for treatment, to reduce this inflammation in the brains of our veterans. Okay, and I think I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Klimas now.
We're going to ping pong a little bit, because what I tried to do when we put this together was merge what we currently know with what we're working on. So when we're talking about, say, inflammation, I was going to mention the kind of work that we're doing in that space. So here at the Institute for Neuro-Immune Medicine at Nova Southeastern University, which is partnered with the Miami VA, so our institute is an umbrella that crosses the Miami VA and Nova Southeastern University. We gathered that huge list of investigators and other people that are either doing the care team, the research team, technical folks, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and we have this huge research portfolio. This first one is Dr. Nathanson, who is a genomics and genetics expert, and she's using genetic signatures to map out what's going on with the immune system, again, hunting for targetable points, since the immune system is the source of inflammation. I'm going to this one. I guess I'll just roll for a little bit. Okay. So inflammation is one thing, and when we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about inflammation in the brain and in the body, right? You all feel the inflammation in your body. That's not too hard to say. I've got inflammation. But knowing that you have inflammation in your brain gives us a whole nother handle, because the brain is grand central station for managing everything. Sleep, pain signaling. Your whole endocrine system relies on all the signaling going on in the brain, right? Not to mention thinking. So the brain inflammation was a great big discovery, a humongous eureka discovery, okay? So when you're thinking about brain inflammation, you say, well, why would that persist 30 years after my exposure to these neurologic toxic hit that you had in 1990-91? And the answer is, well, you set up some chronic process. And sometimes in the body, there's things that cause vicious cycles. And inflammation is one of them. When you create inflammation in the brain, that you can create oxidative stress in the brain. The cells that are responsible for managing everything overwork, don't have enough stuff they need to clean up oxidative stress. And now you have cells that are literally dying in the brain because of oxidative stress in these cells. And when they die, they create a dead cell. And now the immune system has to clean that mess up, and it's immunogenic. It causes more inflammation. So the vicious cycle, oxidative stress, inflammation, oxidative stress, inflammation. One of the big questions we have right now is, if you just fixed one of those, would it all go away? And the answer is way more complicated than that. But there's one study that's underway, and we're doing a humongous shout out to the world, because we only have a few more months to finish recruiting this study. It's the CoQ10 study. It's an antioxidant study that's the only phase 2 study to date that's shown efficacy in Gulf War illness. The only one. And so the VA invested some millions of dollars to roll out the phase 3 study. If the phase 3 study is successful, we get to give that to veterans on formulary for free. So it's critically important that we finish this study. We've recruited roughly half of the study, 100 people or so, and we only have a few more months to find another 100 people. It's in 4 sites. It's in Minneapolis, Boston, the Bronx, and of course here in Miami. And we're desperately seeking volunteers. So all through here, you're going to hear that phrase, desperately seeking volunteers. When we design studies, it should take us 2 to 3 years to completely finish a study like this. But it always, in every single study, even little bitty phase 2 studies, is taking us 4 to 5 years. And the reason why is we can't find the volunteers. Right now, recruitment is why we are slow. It's not knowledge, science, advance. It's where are the veterans that are willing to participate. I can't grab a question. So if you can please spread the word for us, because we want to get there really fast. And this CoQ10 study could be the first VA-approved intervention, which gives us a whole other platform to educate VA providers. When something rolls out like that, then we have to educate them. And now we have something to educate them about. So that would be really great. So oxidative stress. So there's a lot of different studies going on. One is this CoQ10 study I just mentioned. 4 sites. Deborah Cohen, who's right back there in the corner, is the national coordinator. And we're working really, really hard in the next few months to get this done. There's some other antioxidant studies going on. In fact, when I did the clinicaltrials.gov, I think I counted 13 of them. That's how important it is to know whether or not antioxidants are going to be helpful enough. But the biggest issue with antioxidants is, do they cross the blood-brain barrier? Do they get to the brain? Most of them do not. And so there's a lot of trials trying to figure out whether or not we're going to help people at the level of the brain. The cool thing is there's a new technology to let us know, another imaging technique that's just fairly recent that let us discover the oxidative stress in the brain, Dr. Sheng's group in Cornell. And it's now a tool we can use to measure whether or not you respond to treatment by looking actually at the image in the brain, see if it got there or not. So that's exciting. But there's quite a few studies underway, and Dr. Abdullah is here somewhere. Yeah, there you are. She's starting one up. She just got a award letter for Sarasota, so another study in Florida. And then there's some other studies in California, Waco, and Birmingham that are underway right now, in addition to the studies that we have here. And as I say, we have several going on here in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. This is one of ours. It's liposomal glutathione and curcumin. This is potent antioxidants, but they also, in our computerized modeling, do something really important to the immune system that needs to be done. So it's hitting two buttons, not just one, with these particular antioxidants. So another issue about the Gulf War is toxicants. So the initial hit was toxicants. The question has to be raised, are you continuously exposed to toxicants? And the answer is yeah. You get your house sprayed, you pump gas, you're in a polluted world. So toxicants continue to matter. And there's some very practical advice, like don't spray insecticides on your body. It's not your friend. Don't use toxic things in your house. They're not your friends. I had a veteran who went to visit his brother-in-law after we just published a paper saying that one of the broken pathways, the detoxification pathways that doesn't work, is the one that detoxifies gasoline and diesel and all that. But it also detoxifies the naphthalene, which is not mothballs. And he got horrifically ill for years after this 2-week guest bedroom that he stayed in that had in the walls and the panels between the drywall mothballs. So he was in a naphthalene chamber for 2 weeks, and he just absolutely crashed and burned, and it took forever to recover. So continuous exposures to toxicants matter. When you look at how the body detoxifies, they need mitochondria to do that. So many of these studies that are focused on mitochondrial function and mitochondrial improvement, cellular repair, are all trying to help you deal with day-to-day damage that happens from toxicants, ionizing radiation, many things are just in our day-to-day environment. So Dr. Grant, sitting right there, has a study that he's published recently that looked at whether or not DNA repair is happening. And the answer was yes, at a very high rate, which infers there's damage. So if you need to up your pathways to repair DNA, there was something getting dinged in the DNA. So that was important, but it's also nice to know that you can upregulate your repair pathways. You're not that broken. So that's good news. But still, it makes us worry because cancer is a risk when there's DNA damage. And so we tell the providers, watch out for that. Another space that the brain is really important to regulate is everything that there is to know about hormones. And way you look at hormones, there's something a little broken there. Testosterone levels run low, the adrenal stress hormones are depleted, the blunted responses to biologic stress, all of those kinds of things. And this turns out to integrate into our models of the illness, that the hormones matter. And they, of course, are quite different in women and men, so that forced us into gender studies because, well, hell, men and women are different. So turned out, surprise, science proved that. But in our computational modeling, and Dr. Craddock is here somewhere, our kick-ass lead modeler, it turns out the hormones really play into these models of treatment that we are predicting. We also are using hormones in animal models. Dr. Salguera is here too, and he is using an animal model to test whether or not we can promote repair with growth hormone, a hormone your body uses to promote repair. So he's doing a study in the animal model right now looking at that. I mentioned gender differences. Yes, it matters that men and women are different. And when we're doing our modeling, the predominant number of people that show up for our studies are guys because, hey, that's who was in the military predominantly at the time. But women have a special vulnerability to complex chronic illnesses like Gulf War illness and chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia and autoimmunity. So they should actually have a harder time with this. And the models could be quite different, and so they are. And again, Dr. Craddock is doing much of this modeling work. And the whole team here is helping with that. Now, when we did our models, you'll hear me talk a little bit more about it in a moment, but basically we put people on a bike because we know you don't tolerate exercise, and we measure in a serial set of blood draws, we draw some tubes of blood before you start, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 30, 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours next day. We have 9 blood draws over 24 hours. And then we measure every gene that's turned on and off, every cytokine that's expressed, every hormone that's circulating, what are the cells doing, what is their function, everything we know how to measure, we measure in that serial blood draw, which is way too much data. It's more than 1 million bits of data per tube of blood. It's incredibly a lot of data, more than my brain can handle. So Travis Craddock, our computational biology lead, and Gordon Broderick and their teams grab that data, and they use supercomputers and mathematical algorithms to connect the dots. What we want to know is what comes first, second, and third, so we can intervene up front. Instead of treating your symptoms down at the tail of a relapse, we'd like to prevent your relapse, right? So then they can take all that data, model the illness, and do virtual clinical trials. Virtual trials. Hundreds of thousands of different ways to push what button where at what time, and try to put that together into a putative treatment. And you'll see that's been successful for us. We've moved that on from the human data giving us a virtual model to actually curing some mice with this illness. So we got through the animal step of that, and now we're in the human trials. Very exciting time for us. So we're doing this for men. We've got that all mapped out. We're still doing the women's study. We still need more women. And one of the problems we have with our recruitment in these studies is not just finding veterans who are ill, but finding veterans who are deployed or even not deployed, but veterans with similar exposures who stayed well, because we need healthy controls to do these studies. And so in this, you might see that we have 28 or so women that are ill. We have like 2 healthy controls that were veterans. We can't find the women healthy controls. So we really need help in finding and recruiting these studies. So that's this study, the gender study. Dr. Fletcher here doing this study up back 5 or 6 years ago. And we got funded through the VA to do this study. Dr. Nathanson's using data that she derives from these recruitments, but also she's been very imaginative trying to find people who have any female blood in their biorepositories to be able to drive a well-powered study that's looking at gender differences at a genetic level. And then Dr. Morris and her group is Dr. Schmidt here, Rodrigo. Anyway, they're creating a female animal model. Right now, all the models for Gulf War illness are male models. And they've been creating the female model using the animals. So back to this modeling, putting it all together, homeostasis. When you have an illness that affects the immune system, that affects the autonomic nervous system, that affects the endocrine system, and so on, you can't be looking through the blinders of a single specialty. As I'm an immunologist, if I just treated your immune system, I probably couldn't get you better. I have to see the whole thing. So we put together expert teams, and then the glue to our team is the computational modeling group that can glom that all together and actually figure out the balance, the natural network, the homeostatic network of all these systems, and design in these models what is maintaining illness. And even cooler, the concept that perhaps you could predict what might push you into wellness. That's a very exciting concept. This is our moonshot. It's very exciting. We've been working on it for quite some time, and like I say, we finally got it all the way to the human trial. And this is what we're hoping is a curative approach. We hope. But we're also able, using modeling, to tease out subgroups that might need specific treatments. For instance, the autoimmune subgroup. And so we have a study where we're trying to erase the memory of the immune system of autoimmunity through what's called B cell depletion, taking the B cells out temporarily and erasing the immune memory of bad things and good, and then having the good come back, recover after we've erased the memory of the bad. So these are very cool studies. The other kind of subgroups we can tease out are what's the role of PTSD in someone who has Gulf War illness? What's the role of traumatic brain injury in someone that has, veterans don't have one illness. You guys have been through a lot. And an awful lot of people, at least in my clinics, are checking lots of boxes there. Military sexual trauma, holy moly, there's so much of that. And that leads right down the path of PTSD, and so on and so forth. And so, you know, you can't just use the blinders of I'm studying one illness, when in fact the humans that are ill with these illnesses are complicated. So again, there's some studies going on, mainly under Dr. Craddock here, that are trying to tease out all these subgroups. And this is, Travis has a number of studies looking at women, PTSD, comorbid TBI, and so on, and how they influence these models for treatment. So this is our moonshot, the Reboot Study. We're trying to reboot homeostasis, trying to reboot the way all these systems are interacting. We got news last night, it's 7 o'clock last night, that we finally got DOD approval to start our second Reboot Study. We have one underway right now at the VA. Yes, indeed, it's huge, huge. So we have our first Reboot Study right now in men with Gulf War illness down in the VA. We're still recruiting that study. And it is a month of a drug called Intercept and a week of a drug called mifepristone. We found that in our models we have to do 1-2 punches. You can't just hit one system, we have to hit 2. So it ends up being a total of about 5 weeks of treatment and then a few months of follow-up. And that's a nice study, almost done, but our models didn't tell us exactly how long to treat. So we have a second study we designed with the treatment for with the immune quieting drug, Intercept, which is Enbrel. Goes on for 3 months rather than 1 month, and then the mifepristone bump. So we've got these 2 different phase 1 studies, meaning there's no placebo. Everyone in the study gets the treatment. And from those 2 studies, we'll decide which one goes on to phase 2, and we're already funded for phase 2, which is shocking. That doesn't happen, okay? That means as soon as we know the answer to which of these 2 strategies we should use in a national rollout, a large study, we will be able to use the best of those 2 combinations in a national study. And we hope if we can, it's all about recruitment, if we can rapidly recruit and get these phase 1 studies kicked out this year, that next year we'll be in that phase 2 study. So that would be our most optimistic math, but it's all about finding the veterans that want to be a part. It's very exciting, and there's a lot of people in the room that have been in that study that could talk to you about it. This is the idea of homeostasis being wrong, that all these systems talk to each other. And then in this little mountain with valleys, that wellness is a valley. And when you get a little sick, like the flu, and then you recover, you fall back in, and you're always staying in that little well. But something happened with Gulf War illness where you climbed a mountain and you fell into another well, and you can't get past that down mountain. So now your steady state is a sick, steady state. But it's a balanced, steady state. And it's the balance is maintaining things. So our goal by using these computational ways of trying to climb the mountain and fall back into the other well, which is basically what the computer's computational system is use Watson kind of computer thinking to, I mean, these guys burn 3 supercomputers for 3 weeks to run their math for these things. I mean, there's tremendous computational science involved in this. And then they predict how you might be able to flip someone back. So that's what we came from to create these studies that I just described that we're moving forward, and we are in human trial. So this is what we did then. You can see we started up here, put people on the bike, drew a ton of blood, sorry about that. The laboratory people who are well represented here did a tremendous amount of work on that blood, handed all that data off to the guys with the supercomputers. They applied something called chaos theory to all that to try to make all those connections without having to use hypotheses. Tested the theories out in the mouse. We were successful in the mouse. Moved it back, cleaned it up a little bit in the modeling. Moved it all back to a trial design, which is where we are right now, hoping to get to that bottom corner for you in the long run. How's that? That's my slide. I did that slide. I love that slide. So where are we? So this is sort of summarizing the work that's going on here in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. We have the CoQ10 study, national, 4 sites. We have this Reboot study and now a second Reboot study, recruiting. glutathione versus curcumin, recruiting. Cells to therapy, that's a way for us to draw bloods off y'all so that we can do things in the laboratory. We're using Christina's in the back, she's running that study. It's the, Dr. Inley. In that study, we're using cell modeling systems to test our treatments. So we put the cells into culture with multiple drugs and see if combinations of targeted points that we discovered with all that modeling actually make the cells function better. We have the gender studies, a bunch of them. We have the microbiome study. I didn't even touch on that one, but we're doing with Kim and with Dr. Chatterjee. He's the microbiome dude from the university in South Carolina. We're recruiting people to not just give us blood samples, but poop samples so that we can send it off to his laboratory and find out what the microbiome of the gut is doing to help with illness persistence. We have the B-brain study, which Kim's going to talk a lot about, so I won't jump on that. We have the B-cell depletion study, looking for people with autoimmune overlay with Gulf 4 illness. There's some papers, a study that Kim's the principal investigator of that has shown brain autoantibodies that would cause brain inflammation. And so we're looking for people that have those autoantibodies, screening them for the autoantibodies. It's not a commercially available test, it's a research test. But then when we find those people, we'll offer them this clinical trial and see if we can't get rid of the autoantibody production. Finally, there's a big study that's going to kick off in about 6 months called Project In-Depth. It's a VA study where we're hunting for 50 Gulf War vets and 50 Gulf War deployed healthy controls to go to the NIH for 2 weeks and have what they call deep phenotyping. Everything looked at, absolutely everything, in a 2-week in-house stay. It's an extraordinary study. So, and then there's the GWIC-TIC, the Gulf War Illness Clinical Trials Consortia that we are the mothership for nationally here. Aman is here somewhere, there you are, in the way back row. Of course, my peeps are in the back row. Anyway, she's the national coordinator, national administrative director of that study. It's just getting off the ground. Its first study is this second Reboot Study, the one we got approval for last night. And then it's also managing the B-cell depletion study. So those studies will be occurring locally here at NOVA. Rather than the VA, they'll be at NOVA. The rest of our studies are all down at the VA right now. And it's a very exciting time for us to get this clinical trials group off. We had our external advisory board meeting and our investigators meeting just last month. The consortium is also serving as a resource to other investigators to put the infrastructure of their study there. I know that Layla is doing that with her new study in part, where we can offer trial design support, the web-based platforms that people use for assessment, help with recruitment, and even actually implement the study if need be. So everybody that's applying for grants this year or last year was offered that opportunity if they're applying for a clinical trial. This is sort of a summary of what we're going to be doing. That Reboot study I just talked about, going from phase 1 to phase 2 is a part of the trials consortia. Aman's the PI of a study on an herb called bacopa that crosses the blood-brain barrier and does both anti-inflammatory and antioxidant things to the brain. That's a very cool study because it's virtual. You don't have to live in any specific area to participate. We're going to be able to do that whole study. It's a great big experiment to see. But there's so many veterans that don't live near a research center and want to participate in research. So it is allowing us to develop a virtual design where you're just filling out web-based assessments and we send you the medication or the placebo in the mail and do a lot of telephone-based assessment. So that's pretty cool. And blood work would be done locally or drawn locally. And then finally, there's another big antioxidant study we're in the thick of still designing to finish out that set of studies. So we talked about B-cell depletion. Now that's our local portfolio. This is a sense of nationally what's been going on. I don't know if you want to do this or shall I do this? So this is the DoD portfolio, the CDRMP. Anthony is here. Anthony Hardy every year. If you don't know that your local hero and national hero is this guy, he leads the charge at the Senate and the House to get the funding for this work each and every year from the beginning of time since we were first funded. And I've actually joined him. He is an amazing professional. He knows how to do it, where to be, how to organize. I mean, he's standing right by the chamber, getting the 2 minutes in the hall with the most important vote. It's very, very impressive. He's just about to go do that again on Monday. Yeah, it's very exciting. But he needs all of you to help. You'll hear more about it on the committee, on the panel coming up. Very exciting stuff. But you can see overall, these guys have gotten from Congress $170 million, most of it in the last 10 to 15 years, to be able to move this portfolio forward to clinical trials and try to get you your answers while you're still on this planet and we can intervene in time. So it's really, really important. And so there's a funding cycle was just announced last week, and this is online. The investigators can go online and find out about the 2020 cycle, but there's a lovely list of things to do. And the other thing about Anthony and all the other advocates, they're so much a part of this process that every single year they lead. In fact, Anthony has chaired for years what's called the integration panel, the people that set the research priority. And over and over and over again, they say, oh yeah, that's interesting, but what we really need is to get to treatment. And they really have pushed the agenda to move this thing to treatment. And I truly appreciate it. I know Bill Watts, you participate, Jimmy, you participate, Denise, of course, you all participate in all these rounds of reviews and whatnot. But that actual leadership role in deciding what the portfolio is really critical to why we're where we are right now. Why I can tell you I'm already funded for a phase 2 study when I haven't finished a phase 1. That was to cut out the 3 years in between the end of one study and the beginning of the next that the normal process would require. It's pretty exciting. The VA also has spent some money over the years, $133 million on their last sheet. They have $13 million was last year, the last year that I could find the data. And they also have been moving to clinical trial. I think the CDRMP has funded most of what you see on the clinicaltrials.gov, but this VA has been funding the big ones, like the phase 3 clinical trial that's underway right now. And so that's exciting. You'll see they do a lot of phase 1 translational stuff, but they do have a mechanism to do large-scale phase 3 trials, and they're using it. So now I just wanted real quick, because we invited people out there in the world that are doing science to send us what they're doing. And so I'm going to just zip through this. Do you want to do this? Or you want me to do this? I'm just going to zip through. Yeah. So Wes Ashford is at Palo Alto Risk. The VAs have something called War-Related Injury and Intervention Research Studies. Study Center. Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, I always mess up what it stands for. But Wes is the PI of the one in Palo Alto. They have a series of studies going on that have to do with either assessing underlying mechanisms or intervening, in this case with non-pharmacologic interventions, complementary interventions. Dr. Adamson is also in Palo Alto doing, again, alternative strategies using TMS treatments for symptom management. Dr. Linda Chou is in San Francisco. She's done one of the biggest imaging studies that's ever been done. And she's also a part of the B-Brain and the consortia of investigators doing collaborative work. And she's got 3 different studies underway, including a newly funded intervention study, if I remember right. It's not on this list yet. I think she got something this round. Dr. Cook, who's in Madison, Wisconsin, is an exercise physiology and exercise-mediated relapse kind of focused guy, and he has a big VA Career Development Award around that. This is still Dane. He's also looking at autonomic and behavioral interactions after exercise challenge. Layla is your slide. Dr. Abdullah at the Ross Camp and her colleagues have a whole series of preclinical studies that have resulted in what is now clinical studies, a lovely, beautiful path of science to translation to trial that this is a crowded slide and I'm rushing. I wish I could tell you everything about it, but she's here and she can tell you about it, and that would be excellent. Dr. Sheng is doing the imaging studies of the brain and oxidative stress, which is well underway. He's also doing one in chronic fatigue syndrome using an antioxidant, and he's been able to show at least one antioxidant that clearly crosses the blood-brain barrier and reverses oxidative stress in chronic fatigue syndrome. So it's very exciting. New data hasn't been published yet, but that's why I didn't show the slide. But it's another transformative moment for us in the science of all this. In Boston, Dr. Niles is recruiting a study on novel interventions. Dr. Callahan's here somewhere. There he is, Dr. Callahan. He is the #1 animal modeler. He and Mariana Morris developed the animal models that we use in Gulf War illness, and now that we have them, you can use those to rapidly screen putative interventions. And so that space is his space, and he's really the reason why we were able to move so quickly with our Reboot Study. And I'm grateful on so many levels for the work that he and his colleagues are doing. I'm transitioning to my colleague to the left.
Okay. Well, as you can see, the field is very, very active and busy with lots of different aspects of the research, which is absolutely fantastic, and especially for some of us who started in this research very, very early and there was not a lot going on. So this is just a wonderful thing to see that we've come this far and that we're excited for where we're going. And so what we're trying to do is create more efficient processes for scientists to progress their research. And one of the ways we're doing that is with our B-Brain study, which is building scientific collaborations across the research community. We're building a large repository to do that. And there's also the Gulf War Illness Veteran Research Clearinghouse, which is working with veterans to move the pace of science. And the GWICTIC, as Dr. Klimas talked about, Clinical Trials Consortium, which is a really unique opportunity to have all these different clinical trials that can go much more quickly than you would typically see, as she was saying, from the phase 1 to the phase 2 very quickly, which is really, really an exciting thing for us to be able to move the field forward to help our veterans. So I'm going to tell you just briefly a little bit about the Boston Biorepository and Integrative Network for Gulf War Illness, or B-Brain. It's our new repository study. And it's basically providing a resource for future biomarker studies. So what we will be doing is asking 500 Gulf War veterans to participate in our study, some sick and some well. And really, we need as many well veterans as we can get in addition to our veterans who are having health problems, because we want to compare the two. And we want to be as a resource for the research community, so that investigators who say, I have a fantastic idea, but I can't get my hand on any samples, I don't know how to recruit veterans, I don't know how to do this, we can say, okay, we're a resource, come to us, we're going to share those samples with you, and we're going to move this much, much faster in terms of getting to these markers of the illness, and then to be able to then look at those markers pre and post treatment. So that's what the B-Brain is really designed to do, and we've really utilized the whole research community to work with us in that. So we will have 4 study sites around the country recruiting to be able to bring in our veterans to do this as quickly as we can to get these samples. And we're working heavily with Dr. Klimas's group. In Miami, we will have a site in San Francisco with Dr. Chou's group, a site in New York, and a site in Boston to do the new study recruitment. And we're doing this because we have a track record of doing this from our Gulf War Illness Consortium from the Boston GWIC. We were able to, what we thought we'd do is have a small little repository that turned out to be one of the most fruitful things we ever did, thanks to the advice of Dr. Klimas, who suggested we think about doing that. Nancy said, why don't you just do a little repository and then we could have more samples as new ideas come up. And it turns out that was the best thing we ever did, because some of the research in inflammatory markers and the imaging I showed you came from having those repository samples and being able to see things like inflammatory markers in the blood from our veterans, or those autoantibodies that Dr. Klimas was talking about. That all came from having these repository samples. So we're very grateful to our veterans who are willing to share those samples for other studies and let you give us a whole lot of your blood and other samples. So we're very grateful for that, and it's really been helping moving the field forward. So that's what B-Brain is set up to do. And we will be able to share samples with other investigators or other studies and translate from the preclinical to the clinical side with our veterans as well. We are collecting all kinds of things from our veterans for the B-Brain. And again, it's for the longitudinal studies that we're already planning from what we did in our GWIC studies, but also to be able to share this with other investigators. So we will be asking for lots of blood again from our veterans. We'll also be asking for saliva for genetic analyses, stool samples for those microbiome, this gut-brain axis issues that may be going on with some of our veterans. And we actually just put out the very first paper showing that we do think that's happening in some of our veterans, and that's then an area that we can target for treatment. So we'll be asking for those samples from our veterans. And so everything we're asking for is for a very good reason, because we think there's a key a marker that may be related to some of these biomarkers that we're asking you for. We will also ask for exposure outcomes from you, questions about exposures our veterans may have had, so that we can see what may be at the root of the illness as well. We will be looking at cognitive outcomes, brain imaging from our veterans. As I mentioned, the first paper of neuroinflammation in our veterans was just published. We're very, very excited about that because we think that gives us an objective marker of illness. Our veterans for a long time have reported self-report of your symptoms, but getting an objective marker that we can see on brain imaging or blood tests is really where we want to go. In the first year of our B-Brain study, we've worked to engage our veteran advocates, and a lot of you in this room were those veteran advocates that have really helped us get off the ground and get veterans signed up to participate in our study. So we thank you for that, and we hope we can continue to do that. We worked with Dr. Klimas' group to do common data elements for the research field. What does that mean? If you use the same tests across all different studies and you're doing treatment trials, we can then compare the trials apples to apples to say, does it work? If everybody uses a different test to measure your studies, we're comparing apples to oranges and we don't know what's most effective. So we set up this common data elements where we ask researchers across the field to use the same tests that we know are sensitive in our Gulf War veterans who have health problems. So we worked very hard to set that up with the DoD and others, which is now on their website, and we would like all investigators to use these same common data elements. We are using centralized recruitment and outreach efforts across our studies so that we can make sure that we're targeting veterans, but not over-targeting our veterans as well, to come in and do our studies. And a big part of the B-Brain is asking you once for these samples so that we can share it across multiple studies. So we're thankful for that too. And we know our advocates like Denise and others have worked really hard to get veterans to come in and do this for us. And so we are thankful for those efforts, and we want to make sure that you know that we're using this for as many studies as we can. We are working very hard. As you can imagine, a study that has 10 study sites around the country takes a lot of work to get institutional approvals. So we're working really hard to get all those approvals in place. But as you can see, we have many investigators from across the country that have worked really hard to get those approvals in place. So not only can we get the new samples from our veterans to share for other studies, but from prior studies, they're willing to share them for the B-Brain repository as well. So that's very, very important. So things like cerebrospinal fluid, which is something that we don't want to ask our veterans to do a whole lot, take a lumbar puncture. We have our investigators who are willing to share those samples for these key biomarker studies. So we're working really hard to get all those approvals so we can then get those markers and do those studies without asking you to come back in for those types of examinations again. So just so you know that you did this once, it's going to be used for multiple studies, so we thank you for that. And so now we're working really hard to do outreach efforts to our veteran advocates and to ask our veterans who are out there to please consider participating in our studies. And so we've been trying to go to as many meetings as we can, and I'm looking at Denise, who's been just a powerhouse in trying to get veterans recruited for us, and we're very thankful for that, and attending meetings with us and for us to advocate for getting veterans to come and participate in our studies. So that includes today as well as other meetings. The 7th Corps has been tremendously supportive of us as well, and we're thankful for them too. We also have been trying to get out as many media stories about our veterans as we can, and we were fortunate enough to have a nice story at Veterans Day about the B-Brain kickoff. But also, it turns out we had many veterans in the Boston University system who were actually staff members and faculty members as well. When we looked and realized there were so many Gulf War veterans among us that we didn't even realize even at Boston University. So that was a really nice story to get out there that, a lot of people don't realize how many veterans you're working with every day that may be having health issues. So that was really nice. So please take a look at that one and share it with your colleagues. I mentioned a little bit about the common data elements already, so we've been working really hard to make sure everybody's using the same tests with our veterans so that we can compare across studies appropriately and properly. That was a real problem in the early days of the research, and so we've corrected that issue now. We've been working hard to then publish that information, so this is a paper that we did with Dr. Craddock's group, Travis, and so this was a really nice way to get the common data elements out there so the veterans and their care providers can see that, to be using the tests, this was for cognitive assessments, that we know we're sensitive in our veterans, so that you're using the right tests when they come in clinically or for research purposes. So we'll continue to do that. So keep an eye on our social media and our Facebook pages. We're putting up those papers as soon as we have them available. We're also working hard to set up case criteria as well. So that's something we've been thinking about and working on to make sure that people are using the same case criteria of how do you determine who has Gulf War illness and who doesn't. So keep your eyes open for that too. We've been trying to publish our information and research, disseminate this research as widely as we can. And I know Dr. Klimas' group has done this, and we have that. We put everything that we publish up on our social media, and it's freely available. We pay to have it freely available for our veterans and their care providers to download these publications as soon as they're out, so that we're trying to get it translated as fast as we can. So please keep an eye on our social media so you can see that and go up and get any of this information. Here's our website for the B-Brain. The bottom there, you can take a look. And so this is for veterans who are interested in participating. There's information there. There's also information for investigators who want to access the samples, and a fairly simple request form. So you can go in and request the information. It goes to our steering committee just to make sure that someone else hasn't already requested particular samples for a particular reason. And then we approve it and we share those samples. So for a very long time in the research community for Gulf War illness, there were groups who had samples, but they never shared them because they were afraid that once they used them up, that's it, they'd be gone, and there wouldn't be those samples for additional studies. We are getting as many samples as we can, so we are sharing samples. So just so you know that it's going, if you're willing to share your samples with us, we're sharing them with the research community. Cool. Okay.
So I heard a lecture from a biorepository guru, and he said, a really good biorepository is an empty biorepository, that it's not really a bank. You're not supposed to save it. You're supposed to give it away. And that is very true. And Kim's biorepository has brought at least 20 new investigators to the field because she's been so willing to share from this biorepository and encourage people to come in. She's also been fantastic at bringing young investigators into the field. So I really think it's a wonderful thing. We actually hold the biorepository here at Nova. Our laboratory is the bank. And Kim's the PI of the project that lets it go away again. It's a busy space. This is the final little bit of the talk, but some of you have asked us, and this is such an important question, how can I get involved in research? How can I find out what's going on? Where do I go to sign up? On the investigator side, there's how do I find these veterans? One of the biggest problems we have with Gulf War illness is to this very day, there's not an ICD-9 or 10 code. So we can't just go in the medical record and find you. You're not there. It's just amazing. In a VA medical record, I can't look for Gulf War illness and say, how many Gulf War veterans are in my hospital? There's no way to find that out. I could tell you how many asthmatics, but I can't tell you how many Gulf War veterans. To this day, big, big problem. So, and then we have this big problem about rules. The VA loves to do work behind its own firewall, and it's one of the most difficult firewalls to work behind. The DOD has its own privacy review that adds a layer to a layer that's already happened at the university. So we thought, well, how can we just create an independent entity where veterans could go and sign up for studies or learn about studies or be in a registry of sorts that said, hey, if a study comes up I'm eligible for, tell me about it. And so we asked for private donations, so we didn't have to rely on on any federal money. And then we used the NOVA, this university's IRB, the Institutional Review Panel that protects your privacy and makes sure that we're keeping this information in a privacy compliant server, the same server that the medical records actually kept on, actually. And so we've created this clearinghouse space where veterans can go, sign up, and we can contact you about research. Liz, are you back there somewhere? I'm sorry, the light's right in my eyes. Liz Balbin's in charge of this project. She's put it all together. It's on a very simple platform called RedCap. It's a web-based survey. You go into this space, say, I'm interested. I give you permission to recontact me if, and then you have to tell us what you're willing to let us recontact you about, an event, research, or whatnot. So there's a space where you tell us what we're allowed to talk to you about. But many of you know about this meeting today because you already did this. So this is this clearinghouse space. We want to open it up so the investigators in the whole country can come to us and say, hey, I got a study in Madison. Do you have people in Wisconsin that are in your registry? And then we could send out to the Wisconsin vets information about this cool study in Wisconsin, that kind of thing. So that's what's going on. And it's neat because it allows us, because you fill out a survey of your symptoms, to define whether or not you meet the criteria of a specific study. We don't have to pester people who don't. So we can go and say, okay, you seem to meet the criteria for the study, and hey, you're in the right place for this study. Here's the information about this study. So for you, it's a way to go in and let us know you're willing and able. And for us, it's a way to make this a much more efficient process. And I said this once, I'm going to say it again. Cut 2 to 3 years off of every study that's underway because we could find you. Okay? Recruitment is our slowest step of every single thing we're doing. You can't find a single study in Gulf War illness that was done on time, ever, because it's so hard to find the subjects. So we're thinking, well, this could be the tool. And if we take it personally into our institute's domain, we don't have to worry so much about getting behind the VA firewall or going through the DoD HARPO process, but rather, which is a private human subjects process, use our institutional privacy process and then have this much more easy space to work in to try to find you all to get into studies and tell you about the results of studies and so on. And so, so while it's a study in its own right, because it's asking you a lot of questions about your health, that's data, and when there's data, by God, we're doing a study. We're going to learn about you, and we'll publish those results with your permission, because you have to give us permission as you go through this process. But we also use it as a recruitment tool and a way to get the word out about work that's going on. So if you sign up on this, you go on the survey, the very first page says, hey, I'm willing to be in this study. I'm willing to be recontacted for this, that, or the other thing. And actually how you'd like to be recontacted, by email, by phone, or whatever. So you tell us about what your desires are. And then there's this survey that's just about your symptoms and illness severity. It takes about 30 minutes to do. So, I'm sorry, so far, we've had 1,300 people pop on this website. We just put it up 6 months ago. We've got, of those, 790 that actually completed the 30-minute survey. Of those, they were mostly sick veterans. In other words, the healthy controls are flying out before they fill out the survey. So almost all of these people are actually people who are ill. 98% of those people have symptoms, and 724, that's a lot, meet the main case definitions we use in research. So that's exciting. I mean, I didn't have these 724 people in any kind of way accessible to any kind of science. Very exciting time for us to be able to use this tool. And then it's interesting who's in there, because this is all about thought leaders. We have 438 people in the South. Well, that's us. That kind of makes sense that they're going to pick up off Florida. We pushed it out through our clinical space and all that. But the 191 people in the Midwest, we don't have them. You know, where'd they come from? Somebody in the Midwest Facebooked and did whatever to their circle of friends, to their circle of friends, to their circle of friends, and then pushed it out. Very, very cool, and so on. So very nice to see that. Northeast, we're low, 87 people in the Northeast, and we can do a whole lot better up there in Boston and Bronx, where we have some major studies going on. So we got to get the word out. So that's exciting, though, that we have these people at all. And this is kind of an example. Have you been diagnosed or not? Interesting. Of those 790 people I said were sick, only 228 have a diagnosis of Gulf War illness. That means a really important thing. Like 1 person in 4 doesn't know they got this illness. That's something. That's a big deal. That's us, the healthcare providers, not knowing how to make diagnoses and not telling you what you got. Were you in good health before you were in this service? And there'll be questions about when did you get ill, that kind of thing. Oops. So the bottom line, it's great. It's a tool. It's easy. You can use it. Gives us a way to get a hold of you to tell you what, like this conference, that kind of thing. And specifically inform you about studies that are coming down the line. Gives the investigators nationally, not just our group, a way to access potential study subjects. Very exciting. But bottom line, the single best way to get to participate in science is to sign up on this platform. We will share it, with your permission, of course. And so, this is the end, it's cool. So we're rolling out the platform, and we're begging you to help us. We really need, in fact, initially what I'd hoped was that I would get an advocacy group to take charge of this. But then we decided just to go ahead and do it. But we'd love to partner with patient advocate groups and really make this successful. So thank you. Let me put that back to how people find it. There it is. It's on our website. Just go NOVA Gulf War Illness Survey. You'll find it. The phone number's in here a lot in this slide deck. By the way, this is being videoed. It'll be uploaded to the web. You'll be able to go back and look at this lecture if you care to look at it again. You can share it with friends. We're streaming right now. I don't know how many people are streaming, but we anticipate that this will be a very well, there are a lot of people out there watching right now, watching you, and so on. And we're going to take a couple questions right now, then we're going to go to break, and then the Veterans Advocate panel is going to jump up here and do their thing. Yeah, Bill. So we're streaming, so actually you need a microphone to be able to ask a question. Can you?
The microphones for questions are just on either side of the aisle.
Oh, okay. Oh, perfect.
And these are on.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Klimas, Dr. Sullivan. My name is Bill Watts, Gulf War veteran who served with the 1st Cavalry Division. I'm also a veteran advocate. I actually have a 2-part question and a comment. The primary care and the CMP exam doctors could be of great help in recruiting if they knew what they were looking for. So, on to my questions. A lot of the Gulf War veterans feel left out. Doctors don't understand their needs and frankly don't know how to treat the 90-91 Gulf War veterans. Have you tried to set up any type of training locally to the doctors in your areas? Part 1. Part 2, Gulf War veterans' parents of children have actually been creating groups, one such as Gulf War Babies and Parents United, because they're highly concerned about issues being passed on to their children. Are you planning any type of research in the near future?
So those are 2 different questions. I'm going to answer the second one first because when we get this registry together, when we have I would like to get 10,000 or more veterans in that platform because what we're allowed to do with that, with IRB review and all the usual things we have to do, is ask more questions. So if we had 10,000 Gulf War veterans, we could do a survey, a little short, sweet survey about the health of their children and have a very targeted way of answering that second question. There are other research things going on out there that, in fact, there was a great big study that we participated in almost 20 years ago where we brought Gulf War vets in, I think 8,000 Gulf War vets, their spouse, their children, and did assessments. In that, we found the Gulf War vets were at higher risk for, surprise, surprise, Gulf War illness. fibromyalgia and all the things that are associated with Gulf War illness. The spouses were a little more at risk for chronic fatigue syndrome from fibromyalgia, but the children in that study did not have a higher incidence of anything. There was 8,000 vets in their families, a pretty good sample size. But the real way, and it could be something that happens later in life. 20 years ago, those were young kids. So, so that needs to be done better. Now, you asked about training local docs. We do so much training here. It's a very, very impressive effort. And in fact, we have a fellowship program in environmental medicine that we just started this past year. Dr. Bested's here. She's the chair of integrative medicine, very much focused on this illness and training the next generation of doctors. We do in-services and seminars and lectures at the VA and all around town. We do just a lot of it. It's still, in the end, the real way you reach doctors is to have an approved treatment for the patient. Always. I always said the day that we cure chronic fatigue syndrome, which is another focus area, is the day there's a pharmaceutical company and they send that army of drug reps into all the offices in the whole wide world, like they did for fibromyalgia and Cymbalta, you know? So that's when doctors say, hey, that's not in your head, it's real, oh my God, there's a drug, and now I know what to do. And doctors really do want to know what to do. So having treatment guidelines is very helpful. And the only way to do that is to evidence-base what we're doing. Do these studies, do these trials, prove they work, and then create the guidelines that are needed so that we can train people up properly. And many of you get their care here at NOVA. That's because the VA has a community care program. When there's not enough providers at the VA, they transfer them to experts in the community, and we are, at NOVA, the experts in the community, the only ones that I'm aware of for Gulf War illness, I can tell you that, chronic fatigue syndrome and so on, and that program is expanding because of need, and because right now I'm still the only doctor down at the Miami VA that sees any patients with this illness, so it's a little overwhelming. So anyway, that's it. I think that answers the question. Go ahead. Yes, please do. Sorry. Yeah, okay.
Thank you for those questions. And I just wanted to also mention that the National Academy of Science put out a report on reproductive health in Gulf War veterans' children, saying there really wasn't enough having been done so far to date. With the exception of the report that Dr. Klimas mentioned from that study. So they actually have put out a call for a health risk assessment with the children of Gulf War veterans, and the Department of Defense is working on that now to try and develop that. And colleagues at Boston University that I have who working in reproductive health are actually associated with that and talking with them about developing that. So that's coming down the line, just so you know, and hopefully soon. We'll have some better answers. Unfortunately, that's something I get a lot of questions from veterans, and I always have to say we just don't know enough about that. So hopefully we'll know a lot more about that soon. The other question, the practitioners, I think is a very good point. And we've just been funded, just a week ago, I think we heard about a grant that we put in to look at training for practitioners for who treat Gulf War veterans. And we've just gotten word that that's going to be funded. So we're going to have training vignettes and little videos for VA clinicians, but also outside of VA. So there's a lot of folks here at NOVA and other places who are treating Gulf War veterans and don't really know enough or know how to do that. So we're setting that up now. So hopefully in the next year or so, we'll have that vignette set up and there'll be some training. And hopefully the care providers will know a lot more about how to treat Gulf War veterans. So thank you for those very, very good questions.
My stepfather over there, Walker Howard, he was a Gulf War veteran. And I've been doing some research lately on the effects of fasting, on the anti-inflammatory functions of fasting in the brain at least. I know that if you fast for a day or more, autophagy takes place in the brain, and that's basically, I guess, the cleanup of damaged cells, dead cells in the brain. Is that something that is shown promise, or is that something that's been looked at or considered?
That nutrition study. So it's a really great question, and I know that you'll see the clinicians panel at the end of this program this morning, and most assuredly in the integrative medicine model, fasting is a common strategy to try to create an anti-inflammatory process and change actually metabolic rate as well. So two different things that fasting can do. So it's a good idea. There is, I think, one study underway, I'm trying to remember who's doing it, it's national, that's using different nutritional approaches. And I think fasting is one of their things on their list that's underway. I think I saw it on clinicaltrials.gov when I was counting studies for you for that slide. So I think it's a great idea with some reasonable hesitation. Diabetics, hypoglycemia, I mean, sometimes fasting is a very difficult and even potentially dangerous thing to do. So you have to be careful about who you're advising it to, or at least be monitoring certain aspects of it well.
The adrenal fatigue that you mentioned, I saw that as a potential issue with extended fasting for some of these individuals. These results are shown extended fasting periods, 3 days or more, can actually increase stem cell production in the intestines and could actually heal the microbiome of the gut as well. So I don't know, it's something I haven't heard a lot about in this kind of discussion. So
I think we need to understand it in a clinically practical way better. Obviously, anything you do that involves food or not food is going to change the microbiome. That's really an important point. But I think it's a very interesting. A 3-day fast is a difficult fast.
yeah.
It's something you couldn't do very regularly, successfully in most. You need a very determined person, so.
Agreed.
Anyway, thank you very much.
No problem.
All right, we're going to go to, what's next? 5-minute transition?
We have a very quick 5-minute break. We're flying a bit behind since we started late. So if you need to use the restroom, go grab some more food and anything like that. Just try to get back here within 5 minutes. Not sure what time it is. Yeah, so just try and get back here by 10:50.